Hey guys, welcome to another movie review. Today I'm talking about the new Hunger Games prequel. This is a prequel to those original Hunger Games films from back from the 2010s. I believe there was 4 movies and 3 books at the time. And so this is a story that takes place before all of those. And we focus on a young President Snow, the character that Donald Sutherland played in those earlier Hunger Games movies. So this is a younger version of him. And so over the course of this movie, you guys, we find out what exactly turned President Snow into this really terrible person, what kind of series of events happened throughout his early adult years that, like I would say, like young adult, late teen years, that kind of turned him into the person that he was, that we saw him as in the Hunger Games movies. We also follow him as he himself was once involved with the Hunger Games as well. How he was not really a tribute in the games, but he was a mentor to one of the tributes that he had to supervise in the games as well. So we kind of get to see that story as well. That character is played by Rachel Zegler, who plays a character named Lucy Gray Bard. Some of you might recognize her from the West Side Story remake from a couple years ago from Steven Spielberg. Um, Over the course of this movie, too, without getting into spoilers as well, the young President Snow, he kind of gets involved with this scandal that he's trying to clear his name on, and he's also he's trying to basically make sure that the capital and the people of Pan Am don't try to basically give him like a death penalty of any kind for this action that he takes at one point in the movie. And there's also a little bit of a romance between him and this tribute that he has to mentor. They don't play into that very much, I would say. That's definitely a later part of the movie, and they definitely don't explore it as much as you think they would based on the trailers. But there is a little bit of a romance there. There is a little bit of like plutonic friendship turned into a romance, and even though they kind of bonded over the course of this Hunger Games event, there is, like I said, a little bit of a romance there as well. So we do get to follow President Snow, the young version of him anyway, over the course of this movie. We do kind of figure out what exactly, like I said, turned him into this terrible person, why he kind of started out pretty decently, but how these small series of tragic events shaped him into the person that we came to know him as over the course of those 3 Hunger Games stories. But overall, guys, I thought this film was pretty good. I didn't absolutely love this new film. I believe it's called Hunger Games: The Ballad of Songbird and Snake. So a really long title, so they probably could have shortened that. But it was good, though. I enjoyed this movie. It's better than okay, but it's not quite great. It's kind of in that middle area where it's enjoyable, but it's not like, oh, well, you got to rush out to see this kind of a thing. So I'm going to go over some positives and negatives of things that I liked about the movie, things that I think Hunger Games fans are going to be happy with, but also some negatives as to why it's not really my favorite Hunger Games movie. I think there has been some better installments within this franchise, but overall, why it's not maybe not quite as bad as like Mockingjay Part 1 or anything like that. I think that's probably still my least favorite of the franchise. So let's go over some of those things. So for my positives and negatives, first and foremost, Viola Davis plays the villain of the movie. Since President Snow is in a really young age in this movie, obviously they need a different kind of villain for the Capitol and for Pan Am. And Viola Davis plays the villain, and she is terrific in this movie. She's really terrifying, really scary. There's even kind of parts of things that happen with her and actions that she takes that, once again, kind of make President Snow the character that we know him as. And just the way she handles punishment, just the way she makes sure that things are in order within the Capitol, just the way she makes sure that the Hunger Games are supposed to play out the way that they are. Just the way she handles stuff is really creepy, really scary. They definitely found the right villain for this story. She's almost as good as, if not better than, Donald Sutherland was in those Hunger Games movies. I really think she's that good. So just a terrific performance, a terrific villainous performance as well. Huge thumbs up to Viola Davis. To be honest, if she got nominated for an Oscar for this movie, I'd be pretty okay with that. I do think her role in Air is better than this, though, because I think her role in Air, when she played Michael Jordan's mother, I thought was a better performance. But either performance, if either one of these performances got nominated that she did over the course of 2023, I would be perfectly happy with that. She did terrific in both films. Definitely one of the highlights of this movie. We're just like, whoa, wow, they really got that right for sure. Another thing I thought they really got right with this movie is kind of an earlier look of Pan Am, kind of the earlier look of what the Hunger Games looked like before Katniss Everdeen got there with Jennifer Lawrence. I definitely like the way that I think every Hunger Games story takes place in the future, but I like how this film in particular, it's in the future, but it's definitely like an early stage of the future, if that makes any sense, where maybe not all the technology is super high tech yet. Maybe the monitors on the TV don't look as new and high tech the way that they did in some of those earlier Hunger Games movies. And then speaking of the Hunger Games themselves, how they were a little bit more savage, how they were kind of a little bit more claustrophobic about it. They, they didn't give you a forest, they didn't give you this kind of this seashore that I think the Catching Fire one took place as. The arena itself felt more claustrophobic, so I thought that definitely added to something. There kind of sort of was a cornucopia where they get weapons, but at the same time, it's definitely more of an old tech version of that. So I thought that was also pretty clever too. So I kind of like the earlier look of things. I thought that was very well done. I like how they definitely found a way to go back into the past rather than going into the future of the Hunger Games world. So I thought that aspect of the story was also very well handled. Two other standout performances for me were Peter Dinklage as the creator of the Hunger Games. So we do kind of meet the character that started the idea within the Capitol of doing Hunger Games every year. So we get to see Peter Dinklage play this character from Game of Thrones. Some of you might recognize him from that, as well as from Elf. He had a role in that as well. Believe it or not, I know she has a lot of hate right now with all the Snow White comments, but Rachel Zegler is also very good in this movie as well. Her singing ability from West Side Story also makes it into this movie as well. There's scenes where she kind of has to basically, kind of like how those earlier Hunger Games movies work, where you get sponsors and supporters. She uses her singing ability to kind of get people behind what she's trying to do within the Hunger Games. So I thought all that was very well done. So once again, two other great standout performances. I'll also give the guy credit who played President Snow here. Tom Blyth, I think his name might have been. But anyway, definitely a performance movie for sure. Everybody turns in a really good performance in this movie. And like I said, I would say Viola Davis, Peter Dinklage, and Rachel Zegler were probably the three standouts for me. I also like the idea of the Hunger Games having mentors. They kind of play around with that a little bit in the earlier Hunger Games movies, but they definitely put it into full force into this movie. So you can definitely tell they tried to back away from that a little bit in those earlier Hunger Games movies when Jennifer Lawrence was in them. So I definitely like how the mentors play like a bigger role here. We kind of get to see their side of the story a little bit more. We get to kind of see how if they cheat in any way, kind of the consequences of that if they do decide to cheat with the tributes that they have to sponsor. So I thought that aspect of the story was very well handled as well. Also, Jason Schwartzman as kind of a young Caesar Flickerman. I think that's what the name of the character was that Stanley Tucci played in those earlier Hunger Games movies. I thought he was a very good version of a young Flickerman in this movie as well. Definitely another standout performance. Like I said, it's definitely a performance-heavy kind of a movie, just because that's definitely probably one of the better parts of this film is all the performances that the actors and actresses give to it. So definitely another standout performance here. Really like that aspect of the story as well. For my negatives of the movie, though, I did think it was a little too long. This movie does run about 2 hours and 40 minutes, I would say, so it is a very long runtime for a movie like this. It just felt like there could have been parts of it that could have been trimmed out and shortened. They do have 3 acts. They definitely let you know in the story when each act happens. They have like part 2, part 3, and then they have like a title below it. But even that being said, there really is just a lot of material covered in this movie. I know they do have a lot of ground to cover because it is a President Snow origin movie, but it did feel kind of long. I really wish kind of another 30 minutes could have been trimmed out of this movie. 2 hours and 10 minutes sounds like a little bit more of a reasonable runtime for a movie like this. And going back to that too, I thought the structuring of the movie, the pace of the movie, was also not very well done in this movie as far as negatives go. It really kind of felt like 2 movies pressed into one, and I didn't like that at all. It really was kind of a President Snow origin movie, early years of the Hunger Games, and this whole, clearing his name and having this relationship with Lucy Gray Bard, and they kind of try to go back to the origin stuff, and it's just a lot going on. And like I said, there is a lot of stuff here where it does kind of feel like 2 movies happening at the same time. So structuring wise and pacing wise, not one of the strengths of this movie, unfortunately. I also thought this film could have benefited from being more of a character study kind of a film. There's just not a lot of moments here where we really kind of get to see the moments in particular. It's like, oh, well, that's why he snapped. That's why President Snow became the way that he did. There's small little moments where it's like, okay, I can kind of see how that sort of made him become the way he was. I can kind of see how that kind of sort of made him become the way he was. I can kind of see how that sort of made him the way he was. But never like that clear moment. Because, like, even if you look at films like Joker and films that are clearly more of a character study, there's moments in those movies where it's just like, okay, well, that's why the character snapped. That's why they went from such a good person to this really terrible, unforgivable person. And there's just not a lot of opportunities in the script where Snow becomes Snow, really. Like, he gets the outfit, and there's tragic events, and there's things that you could tell certainly frustrated him and stuff like that. But I really think a character study approach would have helped this movie quite a bit, because there's just not a lot of moments that feel like that in this movie. And I also thought the color palette of this film was very dull. There's just a lot of scenes where it's just everything feels super washed out, and it's frustrating because there is scenes where the color palette looks fine, but there's other scenes where it just looks really washed out and really grayed out, and it just doesn't look as interesting as it could be. And overall, I just left this film with more questions. There's just a lot more. Now that they have introduced us to a President Snow origin story, I just have more questions as to why he is the way he is. Now that I've kind of seen his origin, it's just like, really, that's how he became as bad as he was, just from all these small little things. But um, yeah, so I guess I just left this film with more questions, and I really wish I could have just got more answers, because from what I know, it doesn't sound like there's a fifth Hunger Games story at all. So this was kind of the last book in the series of books, and of the movies probably too. But overall, guys, I'm going to give this new Hunger Games film an 8 out of 10. I like it. There's certainly things about it that are really good. Like I said, Viola Davis' performances in itself, the villain she played in this movie is definitely worth seeing just for this movie by itself, just to see that performance, I would say. But like, there's just a lot of things working against it. Just the long runtime, and the structuring, and the pacing, and just the fact that it left with more questions than answers about President Snow, I thought was also very weak in this movie too. So 8 out of 10. There's good things about it, but go into this film knowing that it's not perfect either. It's definitely not the best Hunger Games movie we've ever gotten. I would say the very first one in Catching Fire, I think, hold that title still, the better installments of this franchise. So 8 out of 10 for me. It's enjoyable, but just go into it knowing that it's not perfect, but it's enjoyable enough where I could recommend you seeing it if you go into it knowing that there's also some problems along the way.